Thanks everyone for connecting today to our 2017 Columbus Survey Results webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the results of the annual Columbus Survey that CF Insights conducts, as well as demonstrating some of the new functionality of the Columbus Survey Results dashboard. And we are also going to be talking about some of the other tools that are on offer from CF Insights to members and to the wider field. So for anyone who is on the webinar today and might not be familiar with CF Insights, the idea behind CF Insights is a simple one, and we ask a very simple but I think important question. And that question is, what if each community foundation could know what all community foundations collectively know? And we do that by promoting a shared knowledge platform, which is contributed to by community foundations across the United States, who share primarily financial data and some operational data as well, which we can talk about in more detail as we move through the webinar. That's me. I'm today's speaker. My name is David Rosado. You can call me Dave. I'm the Member Services Manager for CF Insights. And here's our agenda today. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about the Columbus Survey, define what it is for folks who aren't familiar with it, talk about some of the findings from 2017, discuss how CF Insights data can help folks who are signing on to our database, and more specifically our membership, how you can contribute to this data collection effort to support field-wide findings that are available to everyone, and talk about some other tools that are available from CF Insights. So first, what is the Columbus Survey? This is an annual survey that many understand to be the census of the community foundation field. And it got the name Columbus Survey because it was started by the Columbus Foundation in 1988 and has been administered by CF Insights for the last 10 years. This is actually the 10th year that CF Insights has been conducting the Columbus Survey. The survey allows us to report on the state of the field through a comprehensive snapshot of financial data and some operational data, as I mentioned, which is informed by the participation of about 275 or so community foundations annually. The primary focus of the survey are the three data points that are the primary focus of the survey are assets, gifts, and grants. Gifts received by the community foundation and grants that are made by the community foundation. But we also collect some operational data like expenses, revenue, staffing, and more. And actually, before I jump into the findings of the Columbus Survey, I realized that I am missing a housekeeping slide. So I'm going to go ahead and mention a couple of very quick housekeeping items. The first is that all the phone lines have been muted, so I'm the only person that could be heard right now. If you have any questions whatsoever, there is a chat window in the corner of your screen, on the right-hand side of your screen. So feel free to use that to submit any questions that you have. And we will get to as many of them as we can at the end of the webinar. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. So for any colleagues who couldn't make today's session and want to be able to still hear what I have to say today and see the demo, the recording will be made available on our website. Or if you just want to go and revisit the webinar yourself, the link will be sent out to everybody when that's available as well. So, as I was about to jump into, what are the findings from 2017, fiscal year 2017? Let's actually go ahead and log on to the Columbus Survey Results dashboard. And while I'm pulling that up, I just want to mention that the Columbus Survey Results dashboard is a new way to look at the results of the Columbus Survey. And what we used to do is publish a report that was a PDF file. It was more narrative driven, more text heavy, but we wanted to make something that was a little bit more responsive to folks that they can be able to access on their phone, on their tablet, anywhere, anytime. It's interactive. It's more flexible for us to work with as well, as PDF publications take quite a long time to publish and get ready. And this is something that we launched for the first time last year, developed by our wonderful web development team here at Foundation Center. They did a lot of hard work in designing this and making it function as expected. And we have actually made a handful of functionality enhancements for for this year that I'm really excited to share with you all. And I'm going to be doing that as I go through the demo, and we'll spotlight a few of them at the end of the demo as well. But let's go ahead and actually jump into a little bit of the data. And I should also mention that the Columbus Survey Results Dashboard could be accessed at columbussurvey.cfinsights.org. I'll display the URL on a slide near the end of the program. So jumping into the data a little bit, I mentioned this already, but the survey is informed by nearly 270, it was actually 269 community foundation respondents across the United States this year. And as is always the case for the Columbus survey, we do get a really healthy mix of community foundations who are of varying asset sizes, who are from varying locations across the country and serve different types of communities, not just the size of those communities, but the demographics of that make up those communities as well. So here's a little heat map here of where our community foundation responses are coming from. So if you hover over any one of these regions, you can see some stats there, the percentage of assets that are being represented from that region. I do want to point out very quickly that there's really strong, as you'll notice, really strong representation among community foundations out of the Midwest. So I'm going to pause here very quickly and just extend our gratitude to the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance and their gift program, whose more than 90 community foundation members all participate in this survey every year. So it enhances our representation of community foundations in the Midwest, as well as a lot of the smaller community foundations as well that are that are under $50 million or so. Although they do also have a mix of community foundation asset sizes, of course. Our community foundation responses, as I mentioned, serve populations of varying sizes, as you can see on this chart. But I do want to mention the different types of areas that they serve as well. Nearly half, or I should say 44% more specifically, of our respondents do serve both urban and rural populations, urban and rural areas. 38% serve primarily rural areas and 18% serve urban areas. And we do have a really healthy spread of community foundations of different asset sizes as well. I just mentioned this a moment ago, but Indiana Philanthropy Alliance does have several members who may be on the smaller side. We do also get a lot of younger community foundations who participate in this survey. So you'll see a fairly strong representation of community foundations in the smaller asset size bucket. But by all means, there's a really healthy spread here, and there's no asset size cohort that's underrepresented on any level. So moving on a little bit to some of the data that these folks submitted to the survey. What you're looking at here on the left-hand side, the pyramid there, that is the total reported assets held, gifts received, and grants made by our community foundation respondents. So $8.3 billion in grants made, $9.7 billion in gifts received, and $91.1 billion in assets held. If you go to the right here, you will see that $91.1 billion in assets is far greater than last year when we had $76.3 billion reported. I would say that one of the main takeaways, if not the main takeaway, from this year's Columbus survey is that we saw accelerated asset growth throughout the entire field. And you see the median right there. That median is in the double digits, 12.7%. And this is following a 2016 whose median was about 5%. So we saw some really healthy acceleration of asset growth this year. And the majority of survey respondents did experience asset growth of more than 10%. Out of this $15 billion or so of asset growth that you're seeing from the entire field, I should note that a good portion of that is from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, who themselves have grown about $6 billion or so in 2017. But that still leaves about $10 billion for everyone else, basically. So there's still significant growth across the entire field. And that is at least in some significant part due to market conditions in 2017, which helped to foster some of this growth. Investment returns were really were accelerated last year, and that market actually accelerated even further in the second half of the year. So if we run some analyses on foundations with June fiscal year ends versus calendar year foundations, we do see a little bit of a difference. But just to throw these numbers at you, the June group saw the median foundation in the June group saw 11% asset growth, while the December group had a 14% median. So for each of those two groups, there was still double digits. So if we take that knowledge there and we apply it to, and we take a look, I should say, at the top 100 community foundations by asset size in the country longitudinally, which allows us to perform analyses on a consistent sample over time. These foundations are reporting assets that are still $13 billion, a little bit more than $13 billion more than they reported in 2016. So there's still accelerated growth. If you zoom in on the top 100, as I mentioned, investment returns, Silicon Valley, these are drivers of the stat being as much higher as it is over 2016, and it's accelerated more in stark contrast to the year before. So from 2015 to 2016, the top 100 held about $3.6 billion more in assets, and then $13+ billion more. Gift and grant totals are also on the rise. So for this group of community foundations, both of these metrics did reach new highs. Grant increases are going to be a reflection of overall donor intent, but what I should also mention is that it is the result also of community foundations that are keeping to their mission and payout goals to keep in line with the asset growth that they are also experiencing. So these grant making totals are on the rise as well. This is actually a good opportunity for me to demonstrate one of the new pieces of functionality. So I'll do that right now. CF Insights members are already familiar with this functionality on our database and with our on-demand reporting. But for folks who are visiting this Columbus Survey Results dashboard, what they can see is everything is by default a visual chart. And so, you can hover over different bubbles and you can see some of these stats as you move through the chart. But now we've added the ability for folks to very quickly toggle that view, so the data is more front and center. So if you wanted to just see the numbers, if you wanted to copy this into an Excel file or something like that, the ability is there for several of these charts. Not for all of them, but for a great many of them, you could go ahead and toggle between the chart and the table, and I will demonstrate this for a couple of the other findings as well. So now we're going to look at the entire sample again, not just the top 100, and speak briefly about changes in gifts received and changes in grants from 2016 to 17. If we focus on the change in gifts, I emphasize this all the time, but I'll emphasize it again. Tracking or predicting changes in gifts received by community foundations is very difficult. That is demonstrated in two different ways here. One is that you'll see a fairly even spread of the degrees of change experienced by community foundations. So to define this very quickly, what you're looking at here is that 24% of our respondents saw what we call a moderate change in the gifts they received from 16 to 17. 24% saw a dramatic increase. This is the same portion of respondents. A dramatic increase, we define it as being more than 50%. A dramatic decrease is gift totals have gone down by more than 50% as well. So a relatively few number of respondents saw what we call a neutral change, which is plus or minus 10% in gift totals. But as you can see, as I mentioned, there's fairly even spread across all of the different degrees. One thing I do want to mention is that a fairly significant portion of our respondents did experience a dramatic change in one direction or the other, 37% total. So as I mentioned, plus or minus more than 50%. These can sometimes be attributed to something really simple, and that's basically the realization of a planned gift that's rather large, or the receipt of an unusually large one-time gift or so. So in the year that they receive the gift, they're going to see that dramatic increase, and then the following year, they might see a dramatic decrease as their gift levels go back to a more normal trajectory. But in terms of grant making, that's a little bit easier to track. There are fewer respondents at the extremes. There were 37% of respondents experienced a dramatic change in gifts. Only 20% experienced a dramatic change in grants, and most of those folks experienced an increase, or have given a dramatically larger sum than the previous year. But either way, a lot more respondents are neutral in terms of their grant making totals changing by less than 10% in either direction, and about half of all our respondents saw grant making totals change by less than 20%. So that's a bit more stable to track. Looking at gifts and grants per capita, this makes a lot of sense when you look at it, but basically as you go up in asset size, gifts and grants per capita do also increase. There are a couple of reasons for that. There's more money coming in and going out, but part of that is because larger community foundations do tend to be either in or serve larger urban areas that might be reflected as these more high net worth donors are driving these higher dollar totals as well. So even though they're serving more folks, they have these ultra high net worth donors that are driving a lot of this activity. But either way, there's a fairly straightforward relationship between asset size and gifts and grants per capita. Let's jump to the next tab. And actually, I do want to mention that I am skipping a couple of these findings. It's basically just for time, but essentially they're all here. The narrative is on the website, so if folks want to go ahead and explore the ones that I don't mention and have any questions whatsoever, my contact information will be displayed on screen at the end of the webinar. So let's very quickly take a look at product mix. This is focused primarily on two different fund types. That's donor advised funds and discretionary funds. And before I demonstrate this piece of functionality, there is a known issue with this chart. Oh, no, that's working correctly. I guess it was fixed. About an hour ago, it wasn't working, but so I won't even mention the bug. There was a little bit of a display thing on this chart. But so let's look at the difference between community foundations of different sizes and some of the differences in the way they focus on some different product types. So the biggest difference is going to be in the, if you look at, one extreme, the smallest community foundations, and the other extreme being the largest. The smallest community foundations, which are under $25 million in assets, for these folks, they average about, donor advised funds on average make up about 15% of their asset portfolio, while discretionary funds make up about a quarter, just under a quarter. As I mentioned earlier, a large number of Indiana folks, Indiana community foundations are in this group and the next group, $25 to $50 million. So as these smaller community foundations were, or these Indiana community foundations were established through the Lilly Endowment, they emphasize the growth of endowed discretionary assets, and therefore you're going to see a higher average for discretionary funds for some of these groups as well. But either way, smaller community foundations that are younger can tend to be more focused on growth, and therefore you're going to see that that proportionality be a little bit higher as well. But if I jump to the largest community foundations, that's the big difference, is going to be in donor advised funds, which now make up 36% of their assets on average. So it does track to see a flip in the relationship between the two as you increase in asset size, and you can see the differences in each of these groups as you click through each one of these different on this drop down, each one of these different asset size cohorts. But if you don't want to click through the drop down and you just want to see the data, here's another opportunity for you to just turn this into a chart. All of our respondent averages, or the averages for the entire pool, is going to be at the bottom of the chart, and then you can see by asset size breakdown what the differences are between the different groups. And so as you can see, as we increase in foundation size, this is another way for you to see the increase in proportion of assets that are in donor advised funds. I mentioned this earlier when we were looking at the top 100 community foundations over time, but grant making is increasing. Grant making is on the rise, grant making activity. This is in no small part due to the activity of donor advised funds, which in almost all cases have a higher distribution rate than the foundation as a whole. So let me scroll down a little bit more. The dark green is the distribution rate of donor advised funds. The light green is the entire foundation. So in every asset size cohort, you'll see that the distribution rate for donor advised funds is higher than the rest of the foundation. And as we go up in asset size, that relationship, that gap starts to widen as they're made up of more donor advised funds that are active as grant making vehicles. Here's another opportunity for you to switch between the chart and the table as well. And yeah, one other thing I wanted to note about the largest community foundations, they typically, as you go up in asset size, you typically start to see foundations with more non-endowed assets, more pass-through assets that show a little bit more flexibility as grant-making vehicles. So that's why you would see, even for the entire foundation, some of these distribution rates start to go up a bit. On to the next tab. So here we're looking at the revenue mix. I'll just pause here very quickly and mention that this looks a little bit different than last year. Last year we were using stack bars. This year we switched these to donut charts, which I believe are a little bit easier to read. But either way, it's the same functionality if you want to switch between different asset size cohorts to see what some of the differences are in the different operating revenues that they earn and how much of their total revenues come from these different sources. It would come as no surprise to you, this is for the entire sample, so I'll just hover here, that administrative fees on funds managed by the foundation continue to be the main revenue driver for the entire field. We see no sign of that changing. There's no reason for that to change really, but there's no indication that it's changing either. You will see some differences when you switch between the different asset size cohorts, but let me just mention that for the smallest, and actually for community foundations that are under $100 million in general, you'll see a larger percentage of revenues come from two different sources. One of those is fundraising to directly support operations and internal distributions from operating endowments and reserves. For both of these sources, and actually I can show the table, you will see that for foundations under $100 million, more than 10% or more revenues come from fundraising and endowments. So at least 20% come from these two sources. And as you go up in asset size, you can start to see a little bit of a dip in the direct fundraising and the internal distributions as well, and more of an increase on the administrative fees, which again are a significant driver anyway for everybody. But even some fees for service, as some of the larger community foundations have some diversified offerings for folks, and they have a little bit more revenue coming from some of these different sources. And yes, this is another opportunity for you to switch between the chart and the table as well. So one more finding I want to mention before I talk about some of the new functionality on the website is the expense to asset ratio. What you'll see here is that basically community foundations, when they are above $250 million, or I should say our respondents, as you start to move up in asset size and go above $250 million, that's when you'll see that crossover from above 1% to below 1%. And this is, of the relationship between operating expenses to assets. But I should note that the conventional wisdom of the 1% standard is something that is that's becoming, it's something that that folks are moving a little bit away from. So more community foundations are investing a bit more in community leadership activities, in operating their own initiatives, and so these are investments that community foundations deliberately make, which will, for those foundations, raise that ratio a bit. Even though they do perform some direct fundraising to help raise funds for that activity, they're still making that investment, which is going to be which is going to increase their expenses and therefore bring that ratio a little bit higher. So it's not uncommon at all to see community foundations above 1% or even well above 1%. And finally, a look at funds per full-time equivalent. There's a clear pattern here. I barely even have to describe it basically, but as you go up in community foundation asset size, you start to see two things happen. One is that you have more staff. These community foundations that are larger can tend to have more complex operating models and therefore need more staff to manage those models. You also start to see the funds managed per staff member go down as you increase in asset size, with a little bit of a blip here between between under 25 and $50 million. But as we go up in asset size, I mentioned this already before, but larger community foundations they may focus more on leadership activities and other activities, and they need staff to manage those activities, and so typically staff will manage fewer donor funds at these foundations. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the other functionality that I teased before. Let's start with the access to data link. The way this worked last year is this took you, for anybody who visited the site last year or up until we launched the new data last week, this link took you to the About page, and from there you had to click a download link to get the Excel file of assets, gifts, and grants for all of our respondents. That was just one too many steps for folks, and that's something that I thought was one too many steps, so we changed it, and essentially all you have to do is click this link and it'll trigger a download of access to data, and you can see for all of our respondents of the Columbus survey what their assets, gifts, and grants were in fiscal year 2017. I also want to mention that we do continue to maintain our 4 top 100 rankings lists. These rankings lists are based on asset size, distribution rate, number of gift and grant transactions, and gifts per capita. But what's different this year is that if you click on the name of one of the foundations, and this worked last year as well, but the key difference is at the bottom. Last year you were able to click a foundation name. You could see where they rank on the other lists. You can still see that, but now for folks who want to share this easily, you can do that on social media. So you can do that. You can do that on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or you can simply email this to folks. It's essentially a direct link to your ranking card, as I call it. And so just to demonstrate that super quickly, if you click the Twitter link here, it'll generate a tweet with the title of the site, the Columbus survey results, the Columbus Foundation, the year, and a link directly to their ranking card. So when folks go to that site, that link, they can see that ranking card for that foundation. So it's just a quick way for folks to be able to share their rankings on one of these 4 lists. And we thought it was a great way for folks to be able to communicate that with different stakeholders or the public. The other functionality, there are 2 more pieces of functionality. I don't want to forget this. So if I go to one of these pages, it would work on the top 100 list as well, but it's less exciting to demonstrate there. We made the Columbus survey results dashboard much more printer friendly. It technically worked last year, but the formatting was very unkind to printing. But now, if you go to any one of the pages and you go ahead and try to print it, you can save as a PDF, or you can go ahead and actually print a hard copy of any one of the different tabs. And as you can see, everything is centered, everything has been resized, it's formatted beautifully. So you can go ahead and print this out, share it with board members, share it with colleagues who may not have access to the site for some reason at that time. And you can go ahead and distribute this as a hard copy as well. And finally, of the changes that are currently live, we do also I do also want to emphasize that because when you visit this site, the default view is going to be fiscal year 2017 because those are the latest results. That does not mean that the 2016 data has gone away, not by a long shot. If you hover over this, it is now a drop-down. And when you click that, it will refresh all of the narrative, all of the data, and reflect 2016. So now we're looking at the total reported assets, gifts, and grants for 2016. And that relation to 2015. And as you can see, all of that data has been refreshed. And now we're back to 2017. All right. So that does it for the Columbus survey findings and a demonstration of some of the functionality. Oh, actually, there was one thing I wanted to mention. It's not live at the moment. We took it down because there was a bug in the functionality, but I think it might be fixed today, actually, but it's going to be fixed very soon either way. Folks are going to be able to download, for each one of the 5 tabs, folks are going to be able to download an Excel file with all of the data underlying all of the visualizations. So while this is a good example, you can still trigger a toggle between the chart and the table for some of these visualizations. You'll also be able to click a button that's going to be up here in this space somewhere that'll say download to Excel, and you'll be able to see the sample size, the actual statistics that are on the site. Everything will be organized by tab in each one of the Excel files. Apologies that I can't demonstrate it during this webinar, but rest assured that we're going to be bringing that back online, and I'd be happy to connect with anybody separately to demonstrate that for folks. So going back to the PowerPoint presentation, which will just take a second. Here we go. How can CF Insights data help you? So our Columbus survey results offer an up-to-date, fairly comprehensive snapshot of the field, what the field as a whole is experiencing, but that's only the tip of the iceberg of both the data that we collect and the types of reporting that we're capable of producing. So this is just a short listing of some of the reports that we make available on the CF Insights database, some of which are available to non-member participants of the survey as a thank you for sharing your data. And there are others that are examples of, or on the right side are examples of reports that our members can run on individual community foundations. So there are over 90 on-demand reports that help you gauge your performance relative to the field and to your peers. Anybody can take advantage of at least some of that functionality. So for the participants of the survey that are not currently members of CF Insights, they can run reports that compare them to a subset, an aggregated subset of the community foundation field. And member community foundations can query the peers that they want to see in a report, and they will see by name how they compare to individual community foundations. CF Insights members can access reports on virtually any of the data that we collect. So if you're familiar with the Columbus survey and you happen to be the one at your foundation who filled out the survey for us, you can just imagine that all of those data points can all be queried in different reports. You can customize your own peer groups as well. And this is what a peer group query can look like. There are several different ways that you can define your peer group. You can query peers on asset size, query peers on the size of the population that they serve, their focus on donor advised funds, their level of staffing, even by function. So, number of finance staff, number of admin staff, levels of endowment, and so many others. So again, every one of our data points can be used as a characteristic as you define your peer group on our database. I also want to mention that the peer group query tool, a screenshot of which is what you're looking at right now, and the on-demand reports that we maintain run on live data. And while we do get most of our data during our Columbus survey period, we do also get some foundations who sign on throughout the year and share their data even after the close of our survey, that is more than welcome, and we're very happy to have folks do that throughout the year. The only reason I mention that is if you define a peer group and you come back in a month or even the next day or even a few hours later, depending on your timing, and a foundation would have fit into your criteria, then they will be pulled into your peer group automatically. You don't have to do anything new. Just come back to the database, reload the page, and they'll be automatically added to your peer group query and on-demand reports. This is a screenshot of our most popular member benefit. This is called our peer benchmarking dashboard. This allows members to provide a snapshot of their performance up to a small number of their peers, between 5 and 8, or I think between 5 and 7 actually, of their peers. They serve as a really good, concise way to show your board or other folks at the foundation how you compare to a subset of peers that you define. This is included with your membership fee. The turnaround time depends on the capacity at the time, but it typically is no more than a week. There's no formal process for requesting this. You just email me and say, I want a peer benchmarking dashboard. And I go and query our database, decide which peers are most appropriate to you based on some unique characteristics that you give us about your foundation. And from there, we provide some this dashboard as well as some analysis on the data that you see here. But it's also highly customizable. So if there are any data points that you're not interested in seeing, or there are additional data points that you'd want to see, or even a different date range. If you want more than 3 years, you want 5 or 10, we can provide all of those customizations for you as part of this benchmarking dashboard. So let's go through a couple of the on-demand reports that we offer on our database that answer some questions that you may have. Although these, there are so many other questions that you could ask, of course, but a couple of these example questions are, how do gifts we receive per capita align with other statewide peer foundations? How does the volume of funds managed by our staff compare to peers? And how does our overall asset growth trajectory compare to peers heavily focused on donor-advised funds? So here's a quick look at the gifts per capita report. This is a look at a few community foundations that are statewide. So that includes Hawaii, Idaho, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island. All of our reports, just like on the Columbus Survey Results dashboard, are viewable as a chart or as a data table. So on the left, you see an example of a generated report that's on demand. And on the right-hand side, also on demand, also self-serve, you can go ahead and generate that data table as well. All of the reports they come in different visuals, so bar charts, line charts, different stack bars and the like. They are also customizable for our members. So if you run a report and there's something about the visual that you want to have changed, or you want to add data in some certain way, you can reach out to me and I can have that customized for you. But either way, what's really important to mention here is that you can see the visualizations of the reports, but also see the data that's underlining those visualizations as well. And this helps if you need to find any outliers in your data. So if you see a visual and there's one foundation that's quite different from everybody else, you can do a little bit of investigation and see what the basically what the factors of that visual are. For this slide, we are looking at the average fund size report, and it also shows the funds per FTE. So this shows a group of community foundations that serve smaller rural populations, a peer group that I just created. Specifically, we're looking at foundations who serve populations between 25 and 50,000, and whose assets are also between 25 and 50 million. You can see pretty easily which foundations have staff manage fewer, larger funds. In the case of Noble County, Indiana, so the foundation manages funds that are relatively larger than peers, but fewer of them, or the opposite, Dubois County. So 101 funds per FTE, which is quite higher than Noble County, but those funds are typically smaller in size. And again, you can see the data underlining that visual. And then finally, we're looking at a year-over-year asset chart. This helps you understand very quickly the growth trajectory of your foundation versus your peers. These are foundations that are between $350 and $600 million as of fiscal year 2017, with at least 30% of those assets in donor advised funds. So you could very quickly see, some, I guess you could see common events which line up with the economic downturn around 2008, 2009, and the bounce back from there, including especially, and this is reflected in the field-wide results, the really accelerated growth from 2016 to 2017. So some other questions that folks typically ask us to run reports, for us to run reports for them on, include differences in staffing levels for different functions, if they want to try to make a case for a new staff member in a specific department, the types of software that community foundations use, so whether they use different types of software for accounting or grants processing, as they are as they're mulling their own technology transition of their own, and several other questions as well. So again, we have over 90 of these reports, and so they cover all the types of data that we collect. And members can run these at any time. They're always on. They run on live data, or they can request to have something like this run for them with customized data sets, customized peer groups, or even combinations of different reports as well. What's more, you can export or print any of our on-demand reports. So printing is self-explanatory. You can print a hard copy of any of the reports, but you could also export them into a PDF file, an Excel, or a Word document, and run different calculations on the data, or share them with colleagues, or drive your own customized visualizations as well. So how can you contribute to this data collection effort? The one thing is we try to tell folks to stay on top of sharing their data if they can. Unaudited data is totally fine. It helps us develop a more timely snapshot of the field, and folks can still sign back onto the database at a later time if they need to make corrections to their unaudited data or when their audited data is complete. This helps us make timely results, make timely results more available to the field, and it allows us to run some additional analyses at different times throughout the year as well. Folks who are members of ours, and even folks who are not members of ours, can sign on to the database at any time and develop comparative reports, and of course provide any feedback that they may have, so that we make sure that we make enhancements to the platform as we can. Our website is always going to have the very latest about what's available from CF Insights, but of course you can reach out to me at any time. This is my email address at the bottom. I'll share it again at the end of the webinar, but you can reach out to me at any time for any questions, or for a live demo during which you can ask any questions that you have. So what else is available from CF Insights that is not really on our database? We offer 3 different highly detailed financial analysis tools for community foundations that were designed specifically for that purpose. All 3 of these tools are available as free downloads on our website, the URL for which is at the bottom here. These toolkits allow you to perform deep-level, detailed analyses on your own operating model, both how it sustains your foundation and how you might do in the future as well. So a brief note about each. Activity-based costing is our most popular one, the one that's utilized the most often. This allows you to determine the true cost of your products and initiatives. So the way this happens is the toolkit allows you to collect all of your financial data, your expense data, revenue data, and also allows you to survey your staff about how they spend their time to determine to which activities and for which products, which fund types resources are being directed. So a visual just like this one that is generated thanks to activity-based costing allows you to provide a quick summary of which products are producing a surplus revenue, and which require an investment. individual such as this one can help you start a conversation around whether the performance of individual products was expected or unexpected, and what changes, if any at all, might make sense to enhance your sustainability. Economic scenario planning allows you to create 5-year forecast, 3 different 5-year forecasts based on your current operating model and a light amount of historical data. This tool was designed for folks to be able to complete in a fairly short amount of time, so it's the least detailed of the 3 tools, but it's certainly very useful, and it's one that folks can take on without as much of a time investment. So these 3 different forecasts are organized in different ways. So one of them provides a baseline of how you might look in 5 years. That's going to be highly based on the most recent 5 years of your foundation's history. And the other 2 are typically, one is going to be optimistic, one is going to be pessimistic in most cases. And you want to be able to test whether or not your foundation would remain highly sustainable if the investment markets were to perform poorly over the next 5 years, or continue to perform really well over the next 5 years. And you could also test differences in your donor behavior as well. So whether or not you bring in a large number of new donors, or whether or not donors spend down their funds and close their accounts. The toolkit automatically generates a full set of charts for every metric that is part of the toolkit. So that includes assets, gifts, and grants, of course, but also operating revenues and expenses, surplus and subsidy for the foundation. And also at the bottom here, you'll see that you can tell, that you can see in a quick visual how many months of cash you have in your operating reserve and how long it could sustain your foundation. And finally, the interactive strategy model allows you to ask a number of what ifs about your foundation that can be tested based on specific strategic changes that you make to your operating model within the toolkit. So you would enter a couple of years of historical data, and then you could enter some change factors. So are you adding a new product type? Are you changing your fees in some way? Are you adding new staff? And based on those changes, you can see what effects that those changes have on your specific community foundation operating model. Members of CF Insights receive roughly 10 hours of technical assistance per year, some or all of which can be used at any point if you were to work with one of these toolkits. That's included as part of your membership fee, and we're happy to provide that assistance. We also, in addition to that, offer different fee-based levels of consulting that members and non-members can take advantage of. But either way, definitely visit our website, cfinsights.org, to download and familiarize yourself with the toolkits, including, and probably most importantly, our user guides, which are highly detailed and can really show you what goes into completing one of these studies for your own foundation. So again, this is the URL for the Columbus Survey Results Dashboard, columbussurvey.cfinsights.org. So visit it today, tomorrow, the next day. And any feedback is always welcome. Any questions that you may have about the data or the functionality of the site is always welcome. So I invite you all to check it out. And that concludes, I guess, the scheduled program of the webinar. This is my contact information on screen. That's our website and our Twitter handle. And it looks like, okay, yeah, it looks like we don't have any questions to answer right now. But yeah, if you explore the website, either cfinsights.org or columbussurvey.cfinsights.org, and you have any questions whatsoever, or if you want to learn more about membership and how some of these on-demand reports run, and what else we can provide to you as members, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, my contact information is on screen, and I would be happy to help with anything as it comes up. But otherwise, I'll go ahead and conclude our webinar now. Thank you for joining, and we'll be in touch really soon. Thanks.